Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson goes on MSNBC and begs Donald Trump for mercy after ICE has already arrested over 1,000 illegal aliens during their short stint in Chicago. You see, Brandon Johnson is solely responsible for taking the massive wave of illegal aliens that poured into Chicago and relocating them exclusively in black neighborhoods, and then calls Donald Trump racist for going into these neighborhoods and liberating entire apartment buildings from Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang members. Mayor Johnson pounces on this opportunity to call something racist despite the majority black neighborhood complaining about this problem for over a year, proving that he is completely uninterested in the lives of the black people living there and more concerned with the well-being of illegal aliens. As always, like the video and subscribe to the channel, but let's start with this hilarious clip of Mayor Brandon Johnson getting booed at a black mayor leadership summit. Brandon Johnson has the lowest approval rating of any mayor in United States history, that he represents the beliefs and the feelings of the majority of Chicagoans. But let's get into this MSNBC interview where he demands praise and celebration for hundreds of people being murdered in Chicago every year because, hey, it's not as much as last year.
This president is not interested in communicating with those of us who are on the ground every single day, and we know what it takes to govern our cities, and we're doing all the good work, right? Our investments have led to some of the greatest declines in violence across this city and across this country. This president
we have
is
those stats.
unserious.
Let's put them up on the screen.
Yeah, so 30% reduction in homicides, 35% reduction in shootings and shooting victims. Violent crime is down as one of the safest summers we've had in over a generation. This is not about deportation. This is not about community safety.
Okay, this perfectly illustrates the problem that we have with career bureaucrats. Inefficient and incompetent government workers who demand applause for their mediocre results. When you work in the private sector, results are demanded of you. You will get fired for poor job performance. You are given performance reviews, and if you're inadequate, you get let go. But that isn't the case in the public sector at all. And if you work your entire career in a setting where results are never demanded and accountability is never given for lackluster performance, this is the result when someone like that is elected to run an entire major city. He said murders are down 35%, so we should all be cheering and celebrating. Imagine you work in cybersecurity and a business hires you to stop cyber attacks. And after a year of using your service, you go to them and say, hey, cyber attacks are down 35%. They would say, that's an abysmal failure. I want cyber attacks to be down 100%. Imagine you work at a car repair shop and you're bragging about the number of cars that you accidentally make worse instead of fixing being down by 35%. You would go out of business. And we're talking about cars or cybersecurity attacks. In Brandon Johnson's case, we're talking about actual human lives being lost, families being devastated and traumatized for the rest of their lives. And maybe you'll say, well, it's impossible to completely stop murders. Well, fine, but if you want to throw stats around to prove why Trump shouldn't come and intervene in your crime problem, maybe show murders being down 95%, 92%, something significant, not saying, well, we had 900 murders last year and only 600 murders this year. He wants a pat on the back and a big hip hip hooray because only 600 human beings needlessly lost their lives. But despite signing executive orders instructing Chicago PD not to cooperate with ICE or offer any support for the violent protesting happening outside of Chicago, he is complaining that nobody in the Trump administration has gotten contact with him to let him know what's going on.
When it comes to black, brown, white, Asian, working class people, this president has not only been a disappointment, but again, he has worked hard to relitigate the Civil War. And we're not going to stand for it. But she has no idea what she's talking about. And there are protests that are happening all over the country that are demanding justice in this moment.
Have you heard from anyone. Have you heard from the secretary?
Communication with a guy whose clear agenda is to obstruct federal law enforcement capabilities. He's made it clear he doesn't want ICE in Chicago and wants Chicago to remain a safe haven for criminal illegal aliens. All communicating with Brandon Johnson would do is give his team the ability to leak the information about future raids and relocate these criminals and give them shelter elsewhere. Chicago and other sanctuary cities are in open defiance of federal law, but then they want the federal government to work in conjunction with them so they can stifle the federal government as much as possible and make their operation as ineffective as possible. But he goes on to say he wouldn't be opposed to federal assistance, he just wants it in the form of a big blank check.
Have you approached the White House for a meeting?
Well, here's what we've made very clear to the White House. Invest in violence prevention. They took over $800 million away from violence prevention programs. They cut the ATF budget by 30%. Just a few months ago, working with my local police department, we took over 170 high-powered weapons off the streets of Chicago. Well, this administration cut over 1,400 of those ATF positions. We said, make sure that we are funding our education system. Look, if you look at everything that this president is cutting, he is literally cutting resources and services from everything that descendants of slaves fought for: education, housing, transportation, healthcare, good paying jobs. This president has declared war on poor people.
No, Mayor Johnson, you have declared war on poor people. You were the one that bankrupted Chicago, and now they're running at a $1 billion per year deficit because you thought your job as mayor of Chicago was to go into debt to provide unlimited free resources for people who shouldn't even be in the country. He always calls everything racist. Oh, this is going against what the descendants of slaves fought for. But you could have easily spent all that money on the underserved black community, provided these magical social programs that you talk so highly of, invested in higher pay for teachers, more after-school programs, more housing projects in these areas. It would have at least been somewhat noble if you bankrupted the city by spending the money on its own citizens. Instead, you loaded up hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens with free housing benefits, sent them almost exclusively into black neighborhoods, and subsequently priced out the very residents that you claim to be standing for. But the black residents have been complaining for years about the destabilization of their own communities, the violent takeover of entire apartment buildings by these illegal criminals, and now you're using black people as shields, as pawns, to try and paint Donald Trump as racist for coming in and trying to clean up these neighborhoods at the request of the people who live there. Listen to them talk about the recent viral raid in the south side of Chicago, and then we'll debunk all their lies afterwards.
There was this early morning raid of an apartment building earlier this week that involved around 300 federal agents, including those rappelling down from a Black Hawk helicopter. As the Chicago Sun-Times reports, quote, armed federal agents in military fatigues busted down their doors overnight, pulling men, women, and children from their apartments, some of them naked, residents and witnesses said. Agents approached or entered nearly every apartment in this 5-story building, and U.S. citizens were among those detained for hours. Agents claimed the neighborhood was, quote, a location known to be frequented by Tren de Aragua members and their associates. But DHS, of course, gave no evidence to support that assertion, and authorities did not confirm that any of the people arrested were members of the Venezuelan gang.
First off, authorities did confirm that 37 Tren de Aragua members were arrested in this raid. Second off, their malicious plan to use black people as political pawns has been exposed. They thought if they sent all these illegal aliens into the black community, that would stop immigration operations from taking place because the optics would be perceived as racist. That's why I've always said black people should damn near be the most outraged at this mass immigration crisis. But while it's certainly unfortunate that black residents got caught up in the raids and happened to be detained, that is just the reality of what happens if you're somewhere where illegal activity is happening. If I happen to be at a house party and unknowing to me, the owner had a federal warrant out for criminal activity and the feds busted in the door in the middle of the party, every single person at that party would be detained. We would eventually be released just like every black person was in this raid, but that is just standard procedure for something like this. And just the smallest amount of common sense would tell you, if over 300 agents were deployed in this operation, if a Black Hawk helicopter was greenlit to be used in this operation, if this operation was conducted in coordination with FBI, ATF, Border Patrol, ICE. They clearly have massive amounts of intel and legal authorization to be conducting this raid in this capacity. Somewhere along the lines, Americans got this idea that they have the right to run up to law enforcement in the middle of detaining somebody or conducting an operation and demanding that law enforcement show you, a random bystander, a warrant proving that they have the authority to do this. It's the delusional, entitled arrogance of the left. I'm a completely uninvolved party, but I demand that you show me a warrant because I've seen Law and Order on TV before. Why did they target this building and not the thousands of other buildings that are in Chicago? Maybe, just maybe, it's because they had ironclad information and dozens of complaints from locals that Tren de Aragua gang members had taken over this building and were harassing the residents and the neighborhood. But of course, Brandon Johnson responds to this raid, ignores all the facts, and calls it racist.
Well, the tensions are certainly high in the city of Chicago. What the president is doing is absolutely dangerous and firm. There are a number of people, including the President of the United States of America, that have decided to declare war on poor people and on working people across the country. And this raid that you are describing was on the south side of Chicago, where black folks live. And it is evident that this is not about safety. It's not about deportation. This is about the President of the United States of America and his kind that are looking to stoke and foment chaos and fear within our streets of cities across America. But we're going to remain firm and we're going to fight back against this tyranny.
Do you guys remember during the campaign when it was revealed that MS-13 had taken over a string of apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado? And the media was calling it a lie. The Aurora police chief said that that's not happening. The governor of Colorado called it a right-wing conspiracy theory. And then finally, when the evidence was insurmountable and they had to admit it was happening, J.D. Vance mentioned it to a reporter who shrugged it off and said, well, that's only a few apartment complexes that have been taken over by MS-13. And he pointed out the absolute absurdity that the left is trying to desensitize Americans and force them to accept third world country behavior where gangs can take over apartment buildings and extort the residents there. This is an absolute dereliction of the duties of a public official whose job it is to maintain the safety and well-being of their residents. If you're not more mad that 37 Tren de Aragua gang members who have now been designated foreign terrorists have taken over an apartment complex in Chicago and are terrorizing the black residents, and you're more mad at the guy who's fixing that problem, you've completely lost the plot. Trump is putting his foot down on this radical, progressive, social justice experiment where we import the worst kind of people from the third world with cultures that are completely incompatible to ours just to see if we can reform them into upstanding American citizens. And the reason these upper-class ivory tower woke liberals don't care if their experiment fails is because the only people who are negatively affected by their virtue signal experiment is lower-class black people who they never even have to interact with and also secretly hold disdain and disgust for. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Turn on those notification bells so you never miss a video. And I will see you guys in the next one.